So, welcome to our seminar on how to keep your family healthy. And I just was reminded of a verse, 1 Chronicles 16:43. It says, "Then all the people left, each for their own home, and David returned home to bless his family." And it just reminded me, sometimes when we run in ministry, that we need also to be making sure that our family are blessed by our ministry. And you guys are all leaders, so you want your family not to grow up hating church. And I don't think my family hate church. But one of the things we wanted to do was to just kind of, I suppose, share a little bit from Carol and I have been married for 31 years. And I think almost the first day of our marriage, after we got back from honeymoon, we went to church, and we were in a church of about 10 people, and we were leading a life group and leading worship and leading from that almost that very moment. And over the years, probably we've had a few years out of leadership, but pretty much all of that time we have been in leadership. And over those years with our family, I think God's taught us a lot. So we want to just share some very practical things. It is quite a practical session we're going to do. So it's going to be going into the nitty-gritty of things that we felt it would be good to pass on from what we've learned. And some of that's mistakes as well. So it's not. The other thing I need to tell you guys is you're not looking at the Walton family. We're not like, here's the perfect family. We've had our fair share of ups and downs. But I think, having said that, not the Walton family. No, the real Walton family, the one in America. And I think despite that, I'm constantly thanking God for the blessing of my family, for the fact that God has looked after us, protected us, provided for us. And we're not saying everyone must be like us, but I think we have a lot to be thankful for. And so it'd be good to share some of that. So without further ado, let me introduce them. I think most of you know them, but some of you won't. So this is my wife, Carol, here. Yeah, just so you know, because they all look like daughters, don't they? But see, I'm teaching you already. Carol and I have been married 31 years, and this is Leah, who is my oldest daughter, and you are 28. And Leah's married to Dave, and they have a daughter, Edith, and a son, Torben. And this is my younger daughter. This is Megan. Megan is 26, and she has a husband, Ed, and they have two children as well. They have Ruby and Azariah is their younger daughter. I bet you enjoyed Rousseau's son. You enjoyed Rousseau's preach today, eh? Because he was talking about names meaning something. So, they're a great blessing to us. Both the girls and their husbands are deacons in the church and are leading life groups and faithfully serving. And we currently leading the Douglas AM congregation. So that's our family. I'm not going to go on too much because I want to actually get into the practical stuff so that we can share that, and then we'll take questions at the end of that. So please take some notes and be ready to ask any questions, and then hopefully maybe we can pray over some of you guys as well, if that would be good. So I'm going to hand over to Carol, but let me just pray. Father, just as we come together, there's always a challenge in ministry, and we know that ministry can be draining and hard work as well as rewarding and fruitful. And we want our families to come under your blessing and your protection as well. So help us and guide us and lead us into godly ways of managing our household as well as serving you faithfully in ministry. So help us today to discern your voice. Amen. Carol.
Okay, so Chris has divided it into different areas, so each of us will talk about different areas, but I just need to say that we're not trying to tell you how to do parenting. This isn't a parenting session. It's just things that we found that help possibly for you while you're in ministry. So really it's more about you in your marriage rather than how to bring up your children. And as Chris said, if you look at all the families in the church, and lots of us have children that love church and so on, but our families all operate really differently. So that's why we're not telling you how to parent, because we don't want you to look like the Staples completely. Okay, so the area that I've got is we're just talking about examples and pinpointers, and the first one is about good discipline. And when I first got this one, I thought I always have to do the thing about what's right and what's wrong and what's black and white, and because that's how people see me. But I don't want to think of it as discipline as a sort of a negative. So the discipline is, I put that as parents, we need to be good stewards. So if we think of discipline as being good stewards of our life and family, and of marriage, of our marriages, we need to be a good steward. And this will take the clear communication that you need between husband and wife. And if we would have a barometer of how we do well in ministry with our children, loving church too, and bringing them and growing in it themselves, then your children are the best barometer, really, of how you're stewarding your marriage in terms of communication. So if there is a lack, if you do lack in how you discipline yourselves in your marriage, then therefore it will bring chaos. And children see that. And the problem with chaos is then things slip. And then we start to work in a reactive attitude rather than a planned, knowing what's happening, purposeful way. So, and it means that you are going to, often if we're going to therefore work in a chaotic way, we will therefore, things will slip, but also someone is going to be let down. And quite often, it's our children that are going to be let down. So we don't necessarily let down the person who's organising the area which we're working with in church, and we don't necessarily let down our husband or wife, but we will let our children down. And so we need to avoid that. That's the kind of thing you need to avoid, and that only comes from stewarding well how you do marriage, how you're doing family, and therefore that requires good communication. I've put an example here which I just sort of made up, how you can, let's say your 10-year-old would be, oh, I'm really sorry, I forgot you wanted to go to someone's house for tea tonight after school. Forgot that. I've arranged something now myself, and so therefore we need to be home earlier because I've got the sitter coming, so you need to be ready for bed a lot earlier. So I'm really sorry, we're just going to have to cancel that, and we'll just rearrange it. So if you keep doing those kind of examples, that's what your child will remember, and we don't want them to have that negative attitude on church. And so therefore that's why we're saying have good stewarding and planning of what you're doing, what you don't do, how you do it, and making sure everything's within the diary, because then hopefully no one will be let down. And also, you won't overstretch. No member of the family household will overstretch. So good discipline is in terms of the communication. So you don't want to be constantly having to apologise or change your plans just because of what you forget and because you're working in a chaotic way. And the other thing I put here was, so you only want to have those kind of moments where things look a bit chaotic when it's something that's urgent. So, and the urgent things are very few and far between. It's more about if someone has just gone into hospital, or you've heard some very difficult news about someone who needs something urgently. And those are so few and far between. But when those times come, then our children understand it, rather than thinking, oh, it's always urgent, oh, it's always been let down. So we need to, those kind of spontaneous, quick change of plan need to be only really more on the urgent things, and then our children get it. So it means good stewarding, good organisation, and having the clear boundaries for you within your marriage with how you do your ministry, and therefore the boundaries for children. So, so when I talk about these boundaries, we often talk about boundaries for children and what they are and aren't allowed to do, and they know what their boundaries are and we've set them. But I think that does apply to us in terms of our ministry and how we operate in a family. So, for example, I think you need to discuss as husband and wife how many hours you're working, whoever, let's say predominantly the men, but your working hours of the day. How much overtime do you think is acceptable for your family when you're within ministry as well? How much are you prepared to do as a family, which means therefore you travel more or you travel less? These are the kind of things you need to talk about, because you're thinking about the ministry as well as your family. So the two have to be thought about. So I put down questions about the hours you work. What overtime do you do? Do you both work? If the wife is working as well, how many are you saying all of the week, half the week? Do we need the money? Looking at all these kind of things that you talk about, you've got to think about them more in terms of a ministry aspect as well as just the operation of your family, because you don't want to affect your ministry and you don't want to affect the family. It's both together. And in that, it's like also, how many after-school clubs would you allow your children to do so that you can still have ministry? They still do some things, but they don't have to do everything that's on the school diary. They don't have to do all, you choose, because ministry is just as important. And you can say no to your children. So it has to be a no with an understanding of it's in a family unit, this is how we work, we do ministry too. So therefore, you can do this, but we can't do both. Which would you like to do? Which you're going to choose? So we can say no and explain why it is. And the other thing is, we were just talking about it the other day, the other evening, but if you have boundaries, you take away that sense of constantly being busy. And things become fashionable. Years ago, men used to say, oh yeah, I work really long hours. And I think now what's fashionable is to say, oh yeah, I'm really busy, or yeah, I'm so stressed. And this is the kind of language we don't want, and it's not showing that you're stewarding well if you're always saying you're constantly busy, or if you're using that horrible word stress, which is overused because we use it for the wrong things. It shouldn't be in our vocabulary that because of our ministry or because of our family, I'm therefore stressed. So we need to avoid that. And that comes with good stewarding discipline, with the decisions that you make as a married couple and how you're going to operate your ministry and children together. The next point I got is holidays. That they are so important. Chris and I have found over the years it's the most important thing really for our family, and that it was essential for everyone to recharge batteries. But if we talk to our girls about memories of family, you can guarantee most of it will be related to our holidays, what happened, the funny moments. And it's because children see you for who you are. They really see the true people that their parents are when you're on holiday. So and, it's undivided attention, hopefully, for your children too. So plan them, because if you don't plan them, then they are not going to happen. I don't mind how much or how little money we have. Everyone has holiday. Whether it's holiday at home or holiday away, there is a thing called holiday, and we all have to take holiday. We all plan it. So, yeah, that's a really important one. And my last thing was, so I want to say that you have to accept, that's great, thank you. Have to accept that we are different. as Christians, we are different. And we live in the world, but we're not of the world. And so our family unit your family units are going to look different to people who are not Christian. And I think our children have to learn that, so that there is that acceptance of ministry. So we, as parents, do not be influenced by the parents at the school gates. Men, do not be disciplined by your colleagues at work. Do not be, not disciplined, influenced. Do not be influenced by the people at the school gates, your colleagues at work, because we have a different purpose in our life. So how can we compare ourselves to what they do? Because they don't have the same vision as we do. So we have purpose in our life, so we will do things differently. And so we need to live like that. So that does go back to setting your boundaries. So if your colleagues at work work more hours than you, that doesn't mean you do, because, God honours and so on. So don't feel that sense of fitting in. We are different, and we will be different. And it does mean that there will be more challenges with children in terms of their questions. There'll be more conversations, and perhaps more complaints from your children, because you are different, and that's just the way it is. Things like, when your children are younger, it'll be things like what they can watch on television, and what ratings of films. I mean, I asked parents at parties and things that other parents were doing for their children. I'd say, what film are you watching? Because I know they're going to be. And then I'll say, oh, well, my child can't watch that, or whatever the the decision is. Even things like I don't know if my girls realise, but their friends would come back to our house a lot. A lot of the play and socialising would happen at our house, just because I know that it's a safer environment. It's going to work better for me in knowing that my children are going to be doing the right things. And that's what you're going to have to do. Your children can go to others, but, it's just that sense of making sure you can keep things wholesome. A classic one for us was Leah when she was about 10 years old at primary school. So we're talking, nearly 20 years ago now. And EastEnders. And all the other children, her best mates, were watching EastEnders, and that's what they used to talk about. And, in our house, no, we don't watch EastEnders. We don't watch the soaps. And in the end, she was talking about it, and we said, okay, then, we'll let you watch EastEnders for a week, and you can make a decision. If that's going to help you talk with your friends at school, because she felt very left out. So for the week, for 5 days, I don't think she even watched all of them in the end, and she thought, well, that's a rubbish programme. I'm not going to watch that anymore. So, yeah. Things like what you deciding when your children have a phone, or when they have a iPad, or whatever the latest thing is. So those are the challenges that you'll have, because you will probably do things later than their friends are. That's usually the main thing. Your children will pick up things a lot later. What have I put here? Oh yeah, and the one, so definitely teenage years are harder in terms of keeping in ministry and letting them make their own decisions. So there will be more discussions, definitely, as teenagers. I can think of one which makes our house different to others, would be curfew. When do they have to be home by? That for me was the biggest probably difference between us and then others. And those are the kind of decisions you're going to have to make. And they're not necessarily completely what you want, so there has to be a kind of sometimes compromise. So with teenagers, be ready for that kind of discussion. So really that was my main one. Knowing that you're really different because we have a different purpose in life. You have to be disciplined in your stewarding and holidays. Okay. Who's next? It's Lee, yeah.
A conveyor belt of staples. I made my own notes. Dad made some subheadings, and I got modelling well. And actually, there was a scripture actually that Dad provided, and it was one I'd been thinking about anyway from Titus 2 that says, "In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity and seriousness." And I had been thinking as we were discussing what we might be talking about we know that as leaders, we should be striving to lead lives that are exemplary, but this becomes so much more relevant within family. And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by going into lots and lots of detail about stuff as I talk, but it will become clear that this is so much the case that it's within family that that you notice how exemplary somebody's life really is. So Mum's touched on this already about the way we talk about ministry. So if at home all your spouse or your children hear is, "Oh my gosh, I'm just so stressed about life group. Oh my goodness, they're coming over. I can't believe I've got to have life group at my house again. I mean, oh my goodness, all we ever eat is soup." And if it's constantly like, "Oh, the set list for Sunday for worship, I haven't practiced it, I haven't touched it, I haven't thought about it. Oh, it's so annoying that I've got to do this." If that's all they hear, they will pick up on it. Your spouse will start to resent church as well because it sounds like you do. And our children will start to become embittered towards church because they feel like all we think about it is a burden. And it's not in any way saying that ministry is easy, but that's not the same as complaining. There's a difference between saying, I'm struggling with life group at the moment because we've got some challenging people, but that's okay. It's okay to say that it's not easy, but that's different to complaining about it and saying that it's a massive stress and a burden, and it's so frustrating to do it, and it's really hard, and I don't like it. So the way we talk about ministry has a big impact on the home. And similarly, this is my own personal opinion, but I feel like there's nothing that can embitter family towards ministry more than hypocrisy. It is so hard to love a spouse that stands before a congregation and says, we've got to be generous, we've got to love people, we've got to steward well, and then they come home and they're an entirely different person. And that hypocrisy, it's not always stark. It's not always, a preach that says, don't, steward your money well and then coming home and, spending your mortgage on a gambling site. But there is something about being the same person in ministry as at home. Because it can make somebody resentful if they feel like you're a liar. And I do remember hearing just myself when I was at Academy in Bradford, one of the leaders there talked about how teens that have fallen away, that have been the children of pastors and things, they'll often cite a kind of hypocrisy in the home was their biggest struggle with church, that they felt their father would be saying one thing and then doing something entirely different at home. So when we are going to lead life group or lead worship or preach or whatever it is, whatever we're inviting a congregation and the people we're leading to do, we need to be modeling as well at home without our life group knowing, because our children and our spouse are who will see it first. Equally, we don't have to let our families think that we're perfect. I think Megan and I have had different experiences of this just because our temperaments are different. But certainly, I think I felt growing up this sort of idea of, oh my goodness, I bet my parents never do anything wrong. Like I remember being in some situations and it wasn't, it wasn't awful, but I remember sort of thinking, oh, I bet they would never have ever got into a situation where they were in this place. I couldn't possibly tell them where I am because there's no way they would ever have been here. And I think on reflecting on that, it's not that they were never saying that they were it's not that mum and dad were claiming they were perfect, but I certainly didn't feel like I knew if they had ever sinned. And it's not, and I get it as a parent. I don't want to sit down with my children and tell them all my sin. That's not what I want to be doing. It's embarrassing. But that's precisely, I think, what the enemy does, that he wants us to be embarrassed by sin so we pretend it doesn't happen. But what might serve our families more is to, when sin does happen, sort of say, we know it does, this is how we deal with it. You know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you every sin I've ever committed, but I will say I've been in a situation where I didn't make the right decision, but this is the right way to deal with sin. And that kind of ties in with this hypocrisy, that if we're inviting the people we're leading to confess and forgive one another, we need to be willing to be honest with our families, primarily with our spouse, because you know, if they think we're perfect, then there's going to be like that breakdown in communication that mum talked about. And with children particularly, one of the things that I feel mum and dad did very well was there were several people within church that kind of mentored me over the years, people like Maddie Porter and Kara Mlalose and others. And never once was I asked what I talked about with them. Because there was a trust that if they are in the church and they are responsible for me as a teenager, they can trust them that what they're sharing with me is going to be good. So I was never asked about those conversations, and it made me feel then like I didn't have to, like the church was also a place I could talk about those things. The church was also a place that was a part of me growing in my faith. So when we come to helping our children understand church, it's partly letting the church be a part of raising them, and trusting the youth leaders and kids workers that have been put over our kids, that they might thrive. And I feel confident in saying that there are excellent people looking after our children across Living Hope. And then on an entirely different tact altogether, when I met Dave, my husband, I realized how privileged I was, because I honestly thought that the gifts of the Holy Spirit were things all Christians everywhere did all of the time. I was fully under the impression that if you were a Christian, of course you prayed in tongues and prophesy and have, perhaps fallen in the Spirit once or twice. That's what everybody did. And when I met Dave, it turns out that's not true, because he was raised in an entirely different church background that was a little more conservative, we'll say. And this is one thing that I think our parents have served us very well in, that we thought the gifts of the Spirit were really normal. It wasn't spooky or weird. There was nothing unusual. I remember being prayed over in tongues since the womb. I just feel like I always heard it, and I never thought it was weird, because it was just what was done. It was, let's pray, okay. And then we're all shabba-dabba doing, as Jonathan would say. And I remember like as a kid, the church that we were raised in when we were very small was very fruitful in the gifts of the Spirit. I remember coming out of kids' work and having to step over adults that had been slain in the Spirit to go and get donuts, and just thought that's what Sundays were. That's what church everywhere was. And it made me think of a time when I was asking Mum about why grown-ups kept falling over at church, and asking her about the Holy Spirit and what's it like. And she could have said, well, Leah, in Acts 2, Pentecost happened, and here's what, and expound the scripture and gone really deep. But instead, she just spoke about it in normal language, about it's like a cup being filled and sometimes it overflows, and that's kind of what it feels like. And it was just made to feel very normal. And I think one of the things we can do to help our children and help our spouse and help our families love church is kind of make it normal. It's not, it's not a big deal. It's not spooky. It's just, this is what walking with Jesus looks like. And one very small thing, right at the end, I want to say, I guess, is that the one question I feel like that I got growing up that I felt really served me anyway, and the kind of person I am, was that when we were discussing things as a family or talking about church, I would very often get asked the question, what do you think? And that simple, what do you think, even if I didn't have an opinion, made me feel like my voice was heard and that my opinion did matter. And there's something in that children particularly are very perceptive about whether we care about what they have to say. And it doesn't matter how young they are, that even if it's, we sang a new song at church, this is what I thought of it. What did you think of it? Because your opinion matters, and what you think about church matters to this family. So I guess my last thing would be to say, embrace the sentence, what do you think? And then, is it you now?
Okay, is this helping? I mean, are you learning? Okay, so I'm going to fire a few bullets at you, and my bullets are about, if you can move to the next slide, Joe, making home a blessing. And there's a scripture, Proverbs 14:26, that says, whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge. So fear of the Lord secures our homes so that our children feel safe in our homes. And I think there's just 3 quick things I want to say about, if you can move to the next one, Joe. That's just Megan feeling safe in our house, just falling asleep on wherever she stands. And it's just a lovely picture, I think, of a peace that was in the household, that if your child can do that, they don't care. Yeah, so move on to the next one. Right, and the first thing is, you've got to teach your children not to be selfish. So how do you do that? Well, over our ministry, and I think our girls now lead life groups, host people when 412 comes, have people round to dinner all the time, because they've learned that their home is not a place, it's not a castle where you pull up the moat, and it's not a place to be selfish. And I think the way this was instilled in our girls was we always had, or most of the time, someone else living in our home. And that can be a big inconvenience for children, actually, and quite a shock. But in fact, it's teaching them that it's a blessing to have someone else in your home. And one particular, we had a young lady live with us. Her name was Anna. She came for a year. She stayed for 2. In fact, the only way we got her out of our house was to find her a husband. And she got married, and on the last Christmas before she left our home, she gave each of the girls a box. And inside the box was their gift. And their gift was a little piece of paper that said, I would love you to be my bridesmaid. And they had built such a relationship with Anna that really she was like a sister to them. And that had become normal, to have someone else in our home. And I'm not saying you all have to move someone into your home, but showing your children that your home is not some kind of blessing only to you. You're blessed to be a blessing in your home. And so we had, I believe, have always had people coming through our house. I mean, we've had Joe Frankwick, Zandri, Johnny Knowles, interns living with us a lot over the years. And when the girls were there, they learned that actually we shared our home. We shared our home. So I would say you want to teach and model to your children by making sure church family and unsaved people as well come through your home so that they see that they're not to be selfish. And then, Scripture tells us, teach a child, and even into old age, they will do things the right way. So you're instilling in them something about hospitality and something about sharing what we have. Does that make sense to you guys? And probably our best family story on this one is you also have to learn that we don't live just for ourselves. So one time in our church, we had this couple called Sharon and June. Well, they weren't a couple in that sense, but two ladies called Sharon and June. And they loved to come to church, but they were, they weren't the richest of people. I don't know how to describe them, but they were smelly. Very smelly. And one of them, bless her, she had really bad teeth, and it meant the smell. And when I say smelly, in the car, it was just overpoweringly bad. I mean, and they loved coming to church. So we told our girls, well, we pick these ladies up every week, and we take them to church. So we drove out of town, we picked them up, and we brought them to church every Sunday. I mean, how long do we do it for? Must be over a year. Anyway, one time I realized as I was driving that we had this car, and at the back it had to the windows that could only open a tiny way. You know those sort of windows that just open little panel windows. And when I looked in the mirror, each of our girls had their nose stuck out of this little gap in the window. And we're like breathing like this to try and overcome the smell. But you know what's so beautiful is we can laugh about it now, but it taught them that church was not about us and what we wanted to do and everything that we needed. And they weren't little idols in our car. You know, we were there to serve others and to bring others to Christ. And eventually, Sharon, bless her, she had a dentist did all her teeth for her, and the smell improved dramatically. So teaching them that. Secondly, and linked to that is, in your home, if you want your children to have a healthy attitude and to have spiritual health, practice hospitality. You know, invite people round. I think, girls, you would say our dinner table was always busy with people, eh? We always have people around. And my favorite story here, I mean, we have adopted people like, some of you will know Katie Halpin. I mean, Katie's probably eaten in our house more times than Megan has. And it's just become normal to have people, but we've had other people. But I only found this out when we were preparing this session, that we had Milani round for dinner once. And in those days, you remember Milani, the prophetess from 412? She's a prophetess. And she was like a Christian celebrity when we first knew her. So when people heard that she was coming around to our house for dinner, they began to petition our girls saying, "Can we come for dinner? I hear you're having Milani round." And our girls were seen as a route into being invited. Yeah, except we didn't invite Leah. But the thing was that it had become so normal in our house that people knew that if they spoke to the girls, there would be invitations around. And I think it's probably linked to the quality of Carol's cooking. But don't feel that that's what you have to do. I mean, our house became such an open place that one time Carol came back and she went into our upstairs bedroom, which is our attic room, to find someone asleep in the bed up there. And we were trying to work out who it was, that someone had just walked into our house and gone to bed up there. And it turned out to be Jasmine. Some of you will know Jasmine, who is in South Africa, who was a friend of Xandra's, and she just felt free to come in and fall asleep in one of our beds. But hey, you know. So your home models something to your children. And then lastly, and if I was asked to give one important piece of advice on how to keep a spiritual household, a healthy spiritual household, this would be my number one piece of advice. And I've termed it the importance of focus. So attention is attention. So when you're giving your attention to ministry, give your attention to ministry. But when you are at home and you're giving your attention to your children or to your family or to your partner, give your attention to your children. I think too many people, because of these things, have half their attention on their children and their family and half their attention on their work or their ministry or something like that. Now, Megan convicted me. One time I came in and I was victim to this. This was in the days of BlackBerries. You don't really hear of BlackBerries anymore, do you? And I couldn't believe I could do my emails on my BlackBerry. So I used to come in and I used to work. And Megan said to me one day, "Dad, you realize that when we grow up, we're going to remember you coming in and going onto your phone as soon as you come through the door." And you can imagine the weight of conviction just fell on me. And I have resolved, and even now I try to do it, is to say, when you are with your family, forget ministry. Forget work. Give them your undivided attention. You know, that is why, as Carol said, holidays are so important. Because in those moments, I don't believe I'm boasting here when I say this, but I think if you asked either of my girls about our holidays, when we were away, they had my undivided attention. Yeah? I never took work on holiday. I never took ministry on holiday. I never took anything on holiday other than to be with our family. Because we are busy, and there are times when we have to focus on ministry. There are times when we have to focus on work. But the way you will keep health in your household is that when your attention is being given to your family, they see, wow, dad or mum is just interested in me. They're listening to me. They're focused on me. They're speaking to me. They're actually hearing what I'm saying. And that is my one piece of advice that I would say, if you can stick to that. And I'll finish with this. I used to take the girls out on dad-daughter days. We used to have a series of days in the year where they could choose where to go, and me and them individually, we would go on wherever they chose. And that day was devoted to them. And we had some of the best days ever doing that. I mean, it wasn't 100 days a year. It was probably 2-3 times a year. But those days, they had my undivided attention. And when I was at work, I think Megan in particular realized that when Dad came in through the front door, that was the end of his working day. Because as soon as I stepped across the front door, verbal diarrhea just overtook her. And I hadn't even got in the house, and they were in the kitchen. I could hear her shouting, "Daddy, I did this, and Daddy, I did that, and Daddy, I did the other, and Daddy, I went to this." And it was primarily to beat Leah, before Leah could open her mouth, because she would go on for hours and hours and hours about her day, and Megan wanted to get it in. So I would say, make sure in your days and in your household, the children and the family know what you're focused on and be focused on it. Does that make sense? Okay, Megs.
Okay, I'm going to be super quick because we want time to, we want to pray though. Okay, so I have 3 points, not those ones, but I do have 3 points. Okay, so my first one is, some of you may know, when I was a teenager, I fell away. And I don't remember at the time my parents hounding me, being like, "What are you doing with your life? You're ruining it. You're supposed to be a Christian. Come on." I actually don't remember them really doing anything, which I'm actually grateful for now, and I was then as well. But what I realise now is that at the time they were praying for me fervently, and they were really sort of fighting for my soul, I guess. But my mum said that she never had a doubt that I was going to come back to God, and they went away for a week, and I was home alone for a week. And when they left, I was a fallen away Christian. And then when they came home, I was plugged into church. I was walking back with God. I was in a life group. And what happened was, when they were away for that week, I had a God moment, and it was like a complete change. It was overnight. I remember it like yesterday. But the important point is my parents weren't there. They didn't do anything, actually. Okay, yes. They walked with God. They were faithful. They prayed for me. They set a very good example. But they didn't actually drag me kicking and screaming like, "Megan, you're ruining your life. Come on, get in church. She needs prayer." It wasn't like that. It was God. It wasn't them at all. So that's important. If your children fall away, it's not necessarily your fault. It happens. But yeah, I'm here, so it's fine. And so that's really good. But then also, because of their example, I knew the deep truths within me. So when it came back to me coming back to God, I knew it deep down really all along. And also because they were in church, I could just walk back in and everybody knew me. It had changed a lot, but I knew some people, and I slipped straight back in. And when they came back from their holiday, or I can't remember where they even were, when they came back, they didn't make an embarrassing deal about it. They just sort of slipped back into church life and took me to church and helped me get to life group or whatever. It wasn't embarrassing for me, which I appreciate as well, because that would have made me feel a bit embarrassed. So another thing I sort of feel like it's been spoken about was Mum used to have these interrogation sessions. So she'd be like, "How are you? Who are your friends? What you doing? Where you are?" Blah, 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 blah. And it sounds awful, but actually I really appreciated those times, because Mum, she'd sit with me and she'd listen to me and just talk to me and just focus, the whole thing about focus that Dad's talking about, no phones. That was really, those are good memories for me. And she, they're filled with the Holy Spirit. So when they spoke to me, it wasn't I'd tell them a problem and they'd like Bible bash me with this. Well, in Acts 2 it says this, so that's what you should be like. They just oozed wisdom, and that's not an intimidating thing as well. It's sort of like they just spoke to me, and it's very natural, just natural conversation, and that's just it's really nice. It feels real, and then they, might pray at the end of it, but it wasn't like over spiritual. And my favourite point, my last point, is just to demonstrate the point, is just so. Talk about being silly here. So Jo Frankwick lived with us, and when she probably heard she was going to live with the Staples, I do wonder if she sort of was like, oh my gosh, of all the people I had to live with, I've got to live with the lead pastor of the church I'm in, like the lead elder, like, oh, what's going to happen? Like, I'm going to walk in, they're going to pray and prophesy over me, and they're going to be like, Jo, what are your intentions with this year? Where do you see God taking you? How are your quiet times? But actually, let me tell you exactly what happened. She walked through the door. I won't say what happened immediately. And we walked into the kitchen, and for some reason we're just chatting, and one of us said, oh, have you heard that new Coldplay song? It's brilliant. Put it on our phone on YouTube. I'm not even exaggerating about how the picture looked. Like, mum's doing like mosquito dancing to Coldplay, like dad's giving it like dad dancing, bit of Chandler-esque if you ever watch Friends. Like, me and Leah are like, whoa, yeah, I love Coldplay. Come on, Jo, what are you doing? This is so great. And Jo was like, I'm like, what has happened? Why am I here? These are not who the people I thought they were. No, we're not two people. We're not hypocritical. But yeah, so it was just like a really silly moment. But the point I'm making is that we don't take ourselves too seriously. My parents didn't, and we sort of fed off that. And I think for Jo, like, there was a really good start to the year just to show that this is family. We're just fun. We just have fun together. And I think, like, a memory for me, I'm out of breath. I'm supposed to be a fitness instructor, my goodness. So, like, yeah, we just didn't take ourselves too seriously. And I don't know about you, but I would love to see Andrew Selly, like, wake up maybe in, like, his pajamas, like, oh, Emsy, I forgot to take the bins out. Oh, come on. Like, wouldn't you love that? I'd love to see that. Or, like, I love it when you see a celebrity take a bin out. We sort of thrive off that stuff. But the point is, like, it's real life. Like, we've all got to do real. Like, I sort of originally thought Andrew and Emsy just float on this cloud nine, like, oh, I'm so holy, I'm just so spiritual, like, I'm just in God's presence all the time. But actually, like, that we do real life together. Let's not over spiritualize everything. Like, there's not a picture in taking the bins out. Sometimes you just got to do it. Like, let's not be over spiritual. And it then means when there are, like, spiritual times, you take it seriously. And, like, we just had a lot of fun together. We were silly. And it does mean that ministry is really heavy. And if you can have those crazy moments, it will lighten the load a little bit. And it will just help your kids just have fun and know that family is fun. And also, it takes the heavy load off, and it builds a safe haven. So being silly at home builds a safe haven and shows that you're a normal family. Being a Christian doesn't mean you're serious. Like, God is joy, Christianity is joy. We know that's a show them we are joyful. And then there are times of sadness, but yeah, joy comes from the Lord. So those are, and if you don't think we're a silly family, just put on Gangnam Style. You'll see my mum do the moves. She loves it. She was like center stage at my wedding. Sorry.
Great. Well, we're just sharing from our heart there. So that's some things. So 4 key areas that we've shared with you. One is good discipline, steward well, and get your holidays in. Accept that your children are different. Just resolve in yourself that your children are going to be different and help them to live with that and explain why. Carol always made our girls come in early, and they used to complain because they came in earlier from the other kids. So Carol sat them down and she said, the reason you come in early is because we give you attention at bedtime. We read books to you and we focus on you. The other kids, they just go in and then parents don't care. They don't care where they are. They just go straight to bed. So you're different because we love you. And so, accept that they are different, but help them understand well. Model well, live at home the way you speak as a leader. Make spiritual things normal in your life. It's prophesy with your kids. Share with them about prophecy. Prophesy over them. Just make it feel normal to be supernaturally normal. We are supernatural people. Our households are supernatural. Make that part of the normal of your household. Don't shield your kids from God. Yeah? Speak positively about the church. That's part of modeling well. Make your home a blessing. So, practice hospitality. Focus. Stay focused. When you're focused on one thing, be focused on that. And then lastly, as Meg said, have fun. If our children grow up thinking that everything about Christianity and church is just heavy and hard work, no wonder they're going to slip away. We find the joy of the Lord, and sometimes the joy of the Lord is in the silly, not the serious. Amen. And one thing I just want to commend to you guys is fight for your family. Fight for your families. Fight in prayer before the Lord. Fight with your children. I don't mean fight with your children, but fight for the Lord with your children. Don't leave your family to the bottom of your prayer list. Hold on to them and fight for them in the Lord. And, you will open up provision, blessing, and hopefully a bit of a legacy. We've got a little legacy. I pray the same for you. Okay, we've got a little bit of time left. So has anyone got any questions? Anything we didn't cover that you felt we should ask? Kate, yeah.
Hi, I just wondered if you guys had any advice. So my little boy, as you all know, doesn't sit still and be quiet very easily. And he really struggles with church from the whole, now you need to sit still and be quiet in the prayer meetings and things like that. And he's starting to resent it and not wanting to come because he doesn't want to sit and be quiet. We don't tend to let him have an iPad and things in church. He sees other kids have got them and he thinks it's unfair, and it's starting to become a bit of a thing in our house. I just wondered whether you guys had any advice.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Does he like kids' work? Does Jack like kids' work? Okay. I don't have a child your age, so I'm just going to say something that it's something I've been thinking about embracing your season. And if he enjoys kids' work, then yeah, that's great. He can go to kids' work. But before, however it looks, even if I think there's sort of a pressure about having to have your kids sat in the chair there, and I don't want to set a bad example here, but I know times where you just take your child for a walk outside, and then they come in and go to kids' work or whatever. But there's just taking the pressure off of having to have your children sat neatly in a row when we all need to be quiet, because it doesn't happen. That's not the reality of kids. And just embracing the season, and if that means you have to walk the corridors, or I realise Jack's not that age, but sorry, if you have to walk the corridors or whatever, embrace the season.
I was going to say, yes, sometimes it's just a case of when your child doesn't like something, they do make it well known, don't they? Whatever it is. And so every time it comes along, it's a moan every time. And we just have to say, yeah, that's what it is, and just live with it, really. And yeah, there's never going to be the perfect answer or the perfect way, and they just have to learn. Yeah, it is. You don't like it, but that's what it's going to be, and then hopefully your children resign to it. But I don't think, it's something that's going to damage them. So that's the thing. It's working out. Is it going to damage them that they're going to, hate God, or are they going to learn to love God? And if there's aspects of church that they love, then that's great. And if that's just one bit that they don't like, then you just work out how you're going to deal with it as a parent. So how one parent does it may be different to another. But it's just the child has to learn to resign themselves to this is what it is for now. And yeah.
Yeah, just one other thing. We'll go. Sorry, I'll get to that. No, just this one other thing on that is, I think my girls will tell you that I used to take the bits that I could help them enjoy and maximize those. So when we used to have a dancing song in church, I would pick them up and I'd swing them over my head, and I would throw them around and laugh in their face and just, just go really over the top to make that moment fun. There's other bits that they had to sit still and they didn't enjoy, but when I had the opportunity, I used to go for it big time. And sometimes you need to pull someone else in to do that, because if you're trying to manage another kid, you say, "Hey, Chris, will you come and dance with my boy?" And then I'll swing him about over my his. Although yours is a bit heavy, I'd struggle with that. But yeah, just maximize the opportunities you do have. Yeah. Sorry, who? Sarah.
So it's been brought up a few times by elders in Brazil that they can take their kids wherever they go. So before they sleep, or if it's late night, they're always there. Obviously, us as a family, we try and bring our children and let them see us through life, see us through environments, see us through together. But obviously the next day, or when you get home, you pay the consequences. And three screaming children who are overtired, and you can't get them to school, and it's just that knock-on effect. How did you feel when you were growing up?
No, she's asking you, not us.
What you do with your children?
Well, Karen.
I just want to say, two different things. I'm very mindful of everyone parents differently, and we do have different capacities, and our children are very different. So again, what you would choose to do with your children in bringing them to meetings will be different to another. So there can be, I think it's a mix. I think some of it is sometimes you think, hey, we will take them this time, and we will it'll be hard to drag them to school tomorrow, but so be it, that's what we're going to do. But other times it may be, no, actually, we've had a run of it. We really need them they're still our children, and we need to give them good health, so they do need to be in bed. And so I don't think there's any right or wrong. And I think also it's some children adapt better than others. And I can just give it's not quite the same, but an example I have is, so when Chris when he was working in business and he used to go away with work, I made a decision as a parent that I wouldn't go out on the evenings if I would normally while he's away. Because in my mind as a parent, I didn't want the children thinking they're always out, or he's off, now she's off. So it was just one of those things I did on principle that I was in. In terms of life groups, so lots of us can't get sitters for life group, and not all life groups have children in them. Again, it's just a season, so you alternate, or you work something out. So what you do doesn't need to be judged because another family does it different to you. As long as you know in your heart, you're not skiving from God. It is a bit like skiving. Whether you're trying to think up a good excuse or not. You really know whether it's an excuse or you genuinely think this is the best thing for the family. So so I know personally myself, I wouldn't, because it wasn't the same when our children were younger, quite the same. So I wouldn't have been out all the time at every meeting on an evening with my children. I couldn't personally have done it. And I know that in particular, one of my children couldn't have done it. So you do decide. But as long as, like we say, it's not that sense of skiving, and when you're skiving, or whether where you're trying to think of an excuse.
So we'll take Cheryl's question in a minute, but just one perhaps additional point to that I would make is the point Carol made earlier about stewarding our life well. You can minimize the impact of that, because if we're realistic, sometimes that happens because, I'm not saying this of you, but sometimes that happens because of poor diary management. And in fact, if we know that something is coming up where our children are going to have a late night, we can actually steward well enough to prepare them for that. So it's very rare that we're called to something that's going to have a late time for them. We're called the day before. Generally it's been in the diary for a month or however long. And therefore, if we steward our life well, we can, I mean, this is about priorities. This is about seeking first the kingdom. We can actually scale back on what else they're doing that week and prepare them for the church. You know what I mean? And that's actually telling them something as well, is to say, well, you know, the church isn't an add-on. The church is the place that we live. You know, it's actually what we're living for. So therefore, we might not be able to go somewhere else earlier in the week. So think in terms of before as well as the consequences afterwards. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. I know it's hard. Cheryl.
So it's related to what Kate said, you can say, just for me, I always feel like, what does God think? Because he's always called to think of God first, put God first, and then put our family, children later. So I always feel guilty about not coming to agreement to manage all four of them. It's just like, we don't even need that prayer when we call this because we're like trying to control it.
Yeah.
So what's God's point of view? Should we be feeling guilty because we're not coming to prayer meetings, we're not doing those things because it's so difficult to control the kids?
Well, you know,
Well, I think, obviously, Cheryl, you and I are in a similar boat. Our children are similar ages. But I think Megan's point earlier about seasons in life is probably the one here. Because, you know, our mum's talked before about, you know, there were times where she wasn't at absolutely everything the church did because Megan and I were younger. But then there came a point where she could go and we either didn't go with her or we went ourselves because we were older. And I think that when we have families, that's a ministry as well. And the Lord has entrusted those people to us too. And there's a season where that's got to come first. And then there'll be, you know, these years are short. There'll be other seasons where we'll go to, you know, all night prayer meetings and our children won't come with us. But I think guilt, I will say, is not of God. Conviction of sin is the Holy Spirit. Guilt is not Jesus. So if you're experiencing that, that's where it's, you know, where I would say, you know, speak to your life group leaders and pray, but also, yeah, trust that there's seasons for everything.
Okay, so we need to finish there. But what I would say, Cheryl, is that, and Carol made the point about know where your heart is. You know, if you know that you're not going to that prayer meeting just because you don't feel like it, and you're using the children as an excuse, then that's the wrong attitude. If you've had a run of ministry and your kids are sick and tired and moaning, then I think the godly way of dealing with it is to be accountable and to actually say, I'm not just going to duck out because I am part of this family, so I'll just let someone know, you know, accountably to say, I can't actually come to that because I need to put the children first at this time, and I'll be at the next one, you know. And that, I think, is accountable living. So it's living with accountability. And, you know, Jonathan used to use the phrase, cheat the church. And what he meant by that was, you know, there are moments when we have to cheat the church because we're tired and we need to steward our families and we need to look out for our kids. But if our heart is right and we're living accountably, then that's only going to happen 1 in 5 or 1 in 10. So, you know, we're a family who knows that the church is high priority. Jesus is the Lord of our lives. That's what we're going to live for. And this moment, it's actually a blessing. You know, one of the things I was talking to, and we do need to finish, I was talking to someone who was taking their children to things, and they were saying about it. I was saying, well, you know, sometimes we have to take our children to things that means they miss something for church. But do your children consider that to be a privilege or a right? So I'm going to football or I'm going to netball, and I'm going, you know, it's like, that's my right to go. Or do they understand actually that you are allowing them the privilege of going to this thing because you love them and you bless them, but ultimately it's because you want them to love God. And so I think our children, you know, we made mistakes, but overall they grew up knowing that we loved God as a household. And even when we made mistakes, it didn't change the heart of what was in our family.